Russia's foreign ministry says recent U.S. talk of possible strikes on Iran is categorically unacceptable, according to international reports. Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov described such threats as a gross violation of international law and the norms that govern relations between sovereign states, in remarks reported by Russian state media. Russian officials argue the U.S. is acting more unilaterally, and they say that trend is hurting global stability. Lavrov claims U.S. rhetoric is destabilizing and harms Washington's credibility, according to statements reported by Russian news agencies. The Russian foreign ministry stressed that no outside power should interfere in Iran's internal affairs, regardless of the justifications offered for such interference, according to official statements. This position places Moscow directly at odds with Washington's stated approach to the current crisis. The remarks come amid large protests in Iran, with casualty figures disputed and hard to independently verify. Trump has said he'd take very strong action if Iran carries out executions of protesters, according to multiple reports. The gap between Washington's warnings and Moscow's condemnation illustrates competing frameworks through which major powers view events in Iran. Lavrov addressed the Russia-Iran relationship directly, making clear that Moscow has no intention of adjusting its approach based on American pressure. "I do not think that any third country could fundamentally change the relations between Moscow and Tehran," Lavrov stated in remarks reported by Russian media outlets. The bilateral relationship between Russia and Iran is built upon arrangements reached at the highest levels, according to Lavrov. These agreements were negotiated between the presidents of Russia and the Islamic Republic of Iran, and Russian officials say they serve the interests of both states and both peoples. This is reflected in a host of practical material projects, Lavrov explained, pointing to concrete cooperation that extends beyond rhetoric. Russian officials describe the relationship as encompassing nuclear energy, transport infrastructure, and economic integration that they say benefits not just the two countries, but the broader region and the Eurasian continent. The Russian position effectively tells Washington that threats, sanctions, and diplomatic pressure will not alter Moscow's strategic calculations regarding Tehran, according to analysts observing the statements. This represents a challenge to American efforts to isolate Iran economically and diplomatically, as Russia provides an alternative partner with substantial resources. International outlets reported that Iran and Rosatom reached a $25 billion nuclear construction deal, citing Iranian state media. The agreement, announced in September 2025, provides for construction of 4 new nuclear power units in Sirik, located in Hormozgan province in southern Iran, according to Iranian nuclear officials quoted in reports. It would expand Iran's nuclear power plans beyond Bushehr, the Russian-built project that Moscow has long supported with fuel and technical help. The Sirik project is designed to complement Bushehr rather than replace it, according to details reported about the agreement. Together, these facilities would provide Iran with substantial nuclear-generated electricity, potentially reducing dependence on fossil fuels for domestic energy needs, according to energy analysts cited in reports. The scale of the investment signals Moscow's confidence in the durability of the Russia-Iran relationship, despite external pressures, analysts suggest. Nuclear cooperation requires decades of collaboration, from initial construction through operation and eventual decommissioning, creating bonds that industry experts say are difficult to sever. Iranian nuclear officials have spoken about plans for up to 8 reactors under cooperation frameworks, according to industry reporting. This would represent one of the most significant nuclear energy expansions anywhere in the world in recent years, if the plans are fully realized. Rosatom has also mentioned work on smaller reactor concepts in separate cooperation documents, but details are limited in public reporting. These smaller units could potentially be deployed more flexibly and serve regions where full-scale nuclear plants would be impractical, according to nuclear energy experts. The expansion of Iran's nuclear energy infrastructure has multiple implications, analysts observe. Domestically, it would address Iran's growing electricity demands as the economy develops. Internationally, it demonstrates that Iran can access advanced technology and major financing despite American sanctions designed to restrict such access. For Russia, the projects would provide substantial revenue for Rosatom and long-term influence through technological dependence, according to analysts who study Russian foreign policy tools. Countries that operate Russian-built nuclear plants require ongoing Russian support for fuel, maintenance, and expertise. The timing of the Rosatom agreement is notable. September 2025 came after years of American pressure on Iran and months of discussion about renewed sanctions and potential military action. Moscow proceeded with the $25 billion commitment despite the international environment, according to reports. Rosatom functions as an instrument of Russian state policy, according to analysts who study Russian foreign policy tools. Nuclear cooperation serves multiple purposes simultaneously. generating revenue, extending influence, demonstrating technological capability, and creating long-term dependencies that analysts say benefit Moscow. Reports indicate the agreement includes provisions for financing, technology transfer, and training of Iranian personnel to operate the facilities. These elements ensure that the relationship extends beyond simple construction contracts into deeper integration of nuclear industries and technical capabilities. For Iran, the agreement provides access to technology that the country has struggled to develop indigenously due to sanctions and technological restrictions. According to nuclear industry observers, Russian willingness to provide this access at scale represents a significant diplomatic victory for Tehran in the face of American efforts at isolation, analysts suggest. Officials have said Moscow and Tehran reached a framework for up to 55 billion cubic meters a year of Russian gas supplies, with key terms like pricing still unresolved, according to energy sector reports. The arrangement would create mutual dependence, with Iran relying on Russian gas and Russia relying on Iranian payment and market access, analysts observe. Reports indicate the gas agreement includes provisions for Russian financing, with loans covering infrastructure development necessary to transport and distribute the gas. This financing structure would reduce the immediate burden on Iran while ensuring Russian involvement in Iranian energy infrastructure for years to come. The cooperation reportedly extends beyond simple gas sales to include broader energy sector integration. Iranian officials have discussed plans for Iran to serve as a regional gas hub, with connections to Qatar and Turkmenistan that would allow gas trading and distribution across the region, according to reports on the strategic vision. The financing arrangements are crucial to understanding how Russia-Iran cooperation functions despite sanctions, analysts note. Russian loans would fund infrastructure projects that might otherwise be impossible for Iran to finance through international markets cut off by American pressure. These loans would create obligations extending decades into the future, binding Iran to Russia through debt servicing requirements, and creating incentives for continued cooperation, regardless of political changes, according to financial analysts. The financial ties would complement technological dependencies from nuclear cooperation, creating multiple layers of connection. For Russia, providing financing serves strategic purposes beyond simple economic returns, analysts suggest. It allows Moscow to shape Iranian infrastructure development in ways that serve Russian interests and demonstrates Russia's ability to act as an alternative to Western financial systems. The financing also signals to other countries facing American sanctions that Russia can provide an alternative economic model, one based on state-to-state deals and financing that doesn't depend on dollar-denominated international markets, according to analysts observing the arrangements. Against this backdrop of deepening Russia-Iran cooperation, the United States has moved to intensify pressure on Moscow. Senator Lindsey Graham has introduced the Sanctioning Russia Act, designated as S-1241 in the Senate, which would grant the president sweeping powers to impose economic penalties on Russia, according to the bill's text. The proposal would let Washington hit countries that keep buying Russian energy with extreme tariff penalties, according to the bill's backers and coverage. The bill includes provisions for secondary sanctions targeting countries that purchase Russian oil or gas, with China, India, and Brazil, major consumers of Russian energy, potentially facing American penalties if they continue trading with Moscow. The legislation aims to cut off funding that Russia uses to support its military operations in Ukraine and to finance its broader foreign policy objectives, according to Graham and other sponsors. By targeting Russia's primary source of foreign currency earnings, the bill seeks to create economic pressure that changes Russian behavior. The bill's provisions for extreme economic pressure have drawn particular attention. Graham and co-sponsors describe tariff penalties of up to 500% on countries that continue purchasing Russian energy, according to statements and bill summaries. Such penalties would be extraordinary in the context of international trade. Tariffs typically range from 0 to perhaps 25% for goods considered to pose unfair competition. The 500% figure represents a qualitatively different approach. Not a trade measure, but an economic weapon designed to make Russian energy effectively unsaleable to any country that conducts significant trade with the United States. Lavrov referenced Graham's proposal directly in his comments reported by Russian media. When it comes to Russia, there is Senator Lindsey Graham. He is listed in the relevant Russian list and has recently been quite active. He has been promoting the 500% initiative with all countries that trade with Russia. The Russian foreign minister's tone suggested a mixture of concern and dismissiveness about the feasibility of such extreme measures. Naturally, you can smile about it, be angry about it, or reject it, Lavrov said, suggesting that Moscow views the proposal as overreach. The secondary sanctions provisions may be even more significant than the direct tariffs, analysts observe. By threatening penalties against third countries that trade with Russia, the United States would be asserting extraterritorial jurisdiction over global commerce in ways that many countries view as illegitimate. China is Russia's largest trading partner and a major purchaser of Russian oil and gas. India has significantly increased its purchases of Russian oil since 2022, taking advantage of discounted prices, according to trade data. Brazil has maintained economic ties with Moscow despite Western pressure. All three would potentially face American sanctions under Graham's bill if they continue such trade. The approach attempts to force other countries to choose between trade with Russia and trade with the United States, analysts observe. But this calculation may underestimate the resentment such ultimatums create and the desire of major powers like China and India to resist American dictates, according to foreign policy analysts. Lavrov addressed this dynamic directly in comments reported by Russian media. Naturally, when the United States starts acting solely and exceptionally, ignoring all the norms that the Americans have been advocating and promoting in the model they call globalization, they abandon all their principles. This gives us food for thought. Graham says Trump has greenlit the bill, which could raise its chances, though it still needs Congress to act, according to statements reported following a January 7th, 2026 White House meeting. The president's apparent support transforms the bill from a senator's proposal into a measure backed by the administration. The timing is notable, coming as the Iran crisis escalates and as Trump has threatened action against Tehran. The president's willingness to support such extreme economic measures against Russia suggests coordination between pressure on Iran and pressure on Iran's key partner, analysts observe. Trump's reported endorsement also reflects his administration's broader approach to using economic tools as weapons of foreign policy, according to policy analysts. Tariffs, sanctions, and threats of market exclusion have become primary instruments through which Washington attempts to shape the behavior of countries it views as adversaries. For Russia and Iran, Trump's reported support for the tariff proposal reinforces their assessment that they face coordinated American pressure and must deepen cooperation to resist it, according to statements from Russian officials. Supporters say the bill could move quickly, but the timeline is uncertain and depends on congressional scheduling, according to reports citing congressional sources. The bill has bipartisan support, with Senator Richard Blumenthal, a Democrat, serving as co-author alongside Graham, a Republican. This bipartisan backing suggests the measure could pass regardless of narrow partisan divisions on other issues. Both parties have consistently supported tough positions on Russia, creating a rare area of agreement in an otherwise polarized political environment. If the Senate passes the bill, it would move to the House of Representatives, where similar dynamics of bipartisan support for Russia sanctions exist. Presidential signature would then be likely given Trump's reported endorsement. Implementation would follow passage, with the administration granted broad discretion in applying the tariffs and secondary sanctions. Lavrov offered a broader critique of American behavior in comments reported by Russian state media. It makes us believe that our American colleagues might not be reliable when they act in such a way, Lavrov said, pointing to what he characterizes as abandonment of stated principles. The foreign minister noted that the United States has promoted globalization and free trade for decades, establishing international norms based on these principles. But when American interests are threatened, Washington abandons these norms and resorts to threats and direct pressure, according to Lavrov's critique reported in Russian media. Wherever there is oil or some other important strategic natural resources, they think only about advancing their own interests using threats and direct pressure, namely tariffs, Lavrov stated. This characterization presents American foreign policy as driven by resource competition rather than the principles Washington claims to uphold. The critique matters because it shapes how other countries view American proposals and demands, analysts observe. If Washington is seen as hypocritical, advocating rules it ignores when convenient, then other countries have less incentive to follow American leadership. Lavrov's specific reference to oil and strategic resources touches a sensitive point in international relations. Many countries in the global south have long suspected that American intervention and pressure correlate with the presence of valuable resources rather than humanitarian concerns or democratic principles, according to analysts. The foreign minister's framing suggests that American threats against Iran should be understood primarily as resource competition, control over one of the world's largest oil and gas reserves, rather than concerns about human rights or democracy. This framing resonates in countries that have experienced American pressure while possessing valuable natural resources, analysts suggest. For instance, partners of Iran see the 25% tariffs Lavrov noted in comments reported by Russian media, referring to Trump's announced tariffs on countries doing business with Iran. The connection between resource location and American economic pressure is explicit in Lavrov's telling. This critique serves Russian interests by delegitimizing American pressure as unprincipled resource competition rather than enforcement of international norms, analysts observe. It provides a counter-narrative that countries can cite when resisting American demands. Lavrov suggested that extreme American measures indicate weakness rather than strength, according to his comments reported in Russian media. A strong country like the United States acting with such malevolent means and using unfair play only indicates that the competitive position of the United States has been gradually becoming worse. This framing inverts the American narrative, analysts note. Rather than the United States exercising its strength through sanctions and tariffs, Lavrov suggests these measures reveal declining American competitiveness that requires coercion rather than competition on merits. Probably there are some fairer ways to champion its own position rather than a direct discriminatory use of sanction leverage, Lavrov said in the reported remarks. The critique implies that truly competitive economies don't need to threaten trading partners. They win through superior products and innovation. The Russian foreign minister warned that American approaches cannot last for long and would lead to an even more severe crisis in international economic and political relations, according to his statements. This prediction serves Russian interests by suggesting that countries that resist American pressure are on the right side of history, analysts observe. Amid the tensions over Iran and sanctions, the Ukraine situation continues to evolve. French President Emmanuel Macron confirmed on January 6, 2026, that he could re-establish contact with Russian President Vladimir Putin within weeks, according to reports on his statements to French media. This would represent the first high-level contact between Paris and Moscow in some time, as France has largely aligned with broader Western positions on Ukraine. Macron's willingness to engage directly with Putin suggests a shift in French strategy or a recognition that diplomatic channels must remain open, analysts suggest. Kremlin spokesman Dmitry Peskov has said contact is possible if there is mutual political will, according to reports citing Russian state agencies. This sets conditions for meaningful engagement with Macron or other Western leaders. Lavrov himself offered pointed commentary on Macron's approach in remarks reported by Russian media. Recently, President Macron has once again claimed that he would definitely call Putin in the upcoming weeks. It's not the first time he says that, Lavrov noted with apparent skepticism. Peskov's insistence on mutual political will signals that Moscow will not participate in talks designed merely to create impression of diplomacy, while positions remain unchanged, according to analysts interpreting the Kremlin statements. Lavrov was more direct in his criticism, according to Russian media reports. When somebody says, "I will talk," we will definitely need to talk with Putin. And in a couple of weeks' time, I will come up with something. That is not serious. That is just a PR campaign. That's megaphone diplomacy that never led to anything good. The message to Macron and other Western leaders is clear from Moscow's perspective, analysts suggest. Russia wants concrete proposals and genuine willingness to address Russian concerns, not publicity-generating phone calls that produce no substantive progress. Separate from the Macron-Putin dynamic, President Trump and Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky held discussions in Berlin in December 2025. A U.S. envoy said talks in Berlin made progress on possible security guarantees, according to international reporting. Significant gaps remain between Ukrainian demands and what can be realistically provided, according to analysts familiar with the discussions. The Berlin talks reportedly focused on security arrangements that would provide Ukraine with protections without NATO membership. NATO accession remains politically impossible given Russian opposition and divisions among NATO members about admitting Ukraine during ongoing conflict, analysts note. Instead, discussions centered on alternative security frameworks. The idea discussed is to make future support harder to reverse by tying it to congressional action, according to reports. This would make commitments more durable than simple executive branch promises, which could change with new administrations. For Ukraine, such guarantees would represent second best to NATO membership, but substantially better than vague assurances of support, analysts suggest. For Russia, Congress-backed guarantees without NATO membership might be more acceptable if they come alongside other concessions Russia seeks. However, gaps remain substantial, according to reports on the negotiations. Zelensky has prioritized sovereignty and rejected definitive territorial concessions, according to Ukrainian positions reported in media. Russia continues to demand that Ukraine recognize territorial realities, including Russian control of Crimea and parts of Donbass. Moscow has demanded Ukraine leave areas of Donetsk it still controls, based on Russia's claimed boundaries, something Kyiv rejects, according to statements from both sides reported in international media. Russia claims the entire oblast based on its 2022 annexation declaration, though it does not control the entire territory militarily. This demand places Putin on collision course with Zelensky's stated red lines, analysts observe. Ukraine has said it will not accept permanent territorial concessions, though there may be room for interim arrangements that defer final status questions, according to analysts. The gap between Russian demands and Ukrainian red lines remains the fundamental obstacle to settlement, analysts note. No amount of diplomatic creativity can bridge the divide. If one side insists on territorial concessions, the other side refuses to make. The question facing negotiators is whether creative interim arrangements can satisfy both sides' minimal requirements, according to diplomatic analysts. Perhaps security guarantees for Ukraine could make territorial questions less urgent. Perhaps time could allow positions to evolve. Zelensky has repeatedly stated that Ukraine will not accept definitive territorial concessions, according to his public statements. This position reflects both principle, Ukraine's internationally recognized borders should be respected, and domestic politics. Any leader seen as giving away Ukrainian territory would face massive opposition, analysts note. The Ukrainian position creates difficulties for negotiators seeking compromise. If Ukraine will not recognize Russian territorial claims and Russia will not withdraw from occupied territories, then no agreement seems possible on territorial questions, analysts observe. However, there may be room for arrangements that defer final territorial status questions while establishing other elements of settlement, according to diplomatic analysts. Security guarantees, economic cooperation, and diplomatic normalization could potentially proceed while territorial disputes remain unresolved. Whether such arrangements would satisfy Ukrainian public opinion and provide sustainable basis for peace remains uncertain, analysts suggest. Returning to Russia-Iran cooperation, Lavrov specifically mentioned the international north-south transport corridor as an example of practical cooperation, according to his remarks reported in Russian media. This massive infrastructure project aims to connect Russia, Iran, and India through rail and maritime routes. The corridor would provide alternatives to routes that pass through Western-controlled choke points, giving Russia and Iran greater independence from potential Western pressure on their trade, analysts observe. It represents physical infrastructure supporting the alternative economic architecture that Moscow and Tehran are building. For Iran, the corridor would provide access to Russian and Central Asian markets while positioning Iran as a transit hub between Europe, Russia, and South Asia, according to Iranian officials cited in reports. The project's scale means it will take years to complete, but progress is occurring despite sanctions and financial pressures, according to project updates. Beyond bilateral cooperation, Russian and Iranian officials have discussed plans to position Iran as a regional gas hub with connections to Qatar and Turkmenistan, according to energy sector reports. This arrangement would allow gas trading and distribution across the region. Qatar possesses the world's third largest gas reserves. Turkmenistan has substantial reserves as well. Iran's geographic position between these producers and potential markets makes it a natural transit route if infrastructure exists and political relationships allow. Analysts note the creation of a regional gas hub would shift global gas markets by creating alternatives to routes through Turkey or Western-controlled maritime choke points, according to energy analysts. For Russia, supporting Iranian emergence as gas hub serves multiple purposes, analysts suggest. It would create another customer for Russian gas expertise and complicate American efforts to isolate Iran. Lavrov placed Russia-Iran cooperation in the broader context of Eurasian integration, a long-term Russian strategic project aimed at creating an integrated economic space across the Eurasian continent, according to his remarks reported in Russian media. These issues are of special importance, including for the development of the whole region, the Eurasian continent, Lavrov said, making explicit that Russia-Iran cooperation serves broader goals beyond the bilateral relationship. The Eurasian vision sees Russia, Iran, China, Central Asian states, and potentially others cooperating through infrastructure projects, energy agreements, and political coordination that provides alternatives to Western-dominated systems, according to Russian policy documents. It represents an explicit challenge to American global leadership, analysts note. Whether this vision can be realized remains uncertain. It requires sustained cooperation among countries with different interests and systems, analysts observe. Russia has made its position clear regarding Iran through Lavrov's statements. Moscow will not adjust its policies based on American pressure, threats, or economic coercion, according to the foreign minister's remarks reported in Russian media. Lavrov's comments reflect Moscow's confidence that Russia can withstand American economic pressure while maintaining its independence in foreign policy. I believe that we simply need to keep on working and implementing the arrangements that we have with Iran and that Russia has with all its trade and economic partners, Lavrov stated in the reported remarks. The foreign minister suggested that American use of extreme economic measures reveals weakness rather than strength, a declining competitive position that requires coercion rather than competition, according to his characterization. Whether this assessment proves accurate depends on how various countries respond to American pressure, analysts note. What is clear is that the confrontation is not merely between the United States and Iran or between the United States and Russia, but between competing visions of international order, analysts observe. Washington insists on its prerogatives to pressure countries it views as threats. Moscow and Tehran insist on sovereignty and resistance to what they characterize as American hegemony. The coming weeks will test these competing positions. The Senate may vote on Graham's sanctions bill. Macron may contact Putin regarding Ukraine. Trump and Zelensky may advance security guarantee discussions. Iran may carry out executions, triggering Trump's threatened response. Russia and Iran may sign additional cooperation agreements. Each development will shape the broader confrontation between American power and those resisting it, analysts suggest. The stakes extend beyond any single country or crisis to fundamental questions about how international relations will function. Lavrov's message was defiant, according to his reported remarks. Russia will not be intimidated, isolated, or coerced into abandoning partners based on American threats. Whether Washington accepts this reality and seeks compromise or escalates pressure further will determine whether the current tensions lead toward resolution or deeper conflict. For now, Moscow's position remains firm, according to official statements. The Russia-Iran partnership continues. Alternative economic architectures are being built, and the confrontation between Washington and those resisting American pressure shows no signs of resolution. The world watches as these forces collide. American insistence on shaping others' behavior versus Russian and Iranian insistence on sovereignty and independence. The outcome will shape international relations for years to come.